Hi, this is Fred Hess of Hess Consulting. This is the first in a series of presentations about the power of process for driving business improvement. There will be a series of 8, so please return to this channel and check out the rest of them. Now, process, according to Michael Hammer in his book Agenda, is the Clark Kent of business ideas. It is seemingly mild and unassuming, but actually amazingly powerful. Now, I subscribe to his statement. It has turned out for me to be a very powerful technique to analyze a business and allow it to help you change it and grow it. The definition of a process by GAO is that a process is a set of activities that produce products and services for customers. That seems to be pretty obvious. Michael Hammer says a process is an organized group of related activities that together create a result of value to customers. Now that has a little bit more significance, and I think that that's the key. Myself, I realized back in 2004 that when I use the term process, I use it as a proxy for a business operation, which is comprised of process steps or tasks, people, and tools. But it also includes knowledge and experience, a skill level that the people in the business process must have in order to have it successful. Now let's talk about the process model elements. The way that most process models are constructed looks something like this. There are different variations, but the first is the role. And the process model is arranged so that all of the tasks for a specific role are in a swim lane. And that's why you call these process models with swim lanes. So this is an important concept that's I'll explain in just a minute what it does for extracting additional information out of the model. So why do we pick role instead of people or organization? Well, people is obvious. You don't want to put names in here because if there's turnover, then you have to substitute somebody else's name. But the other way that you might do it is organization, a group or a department or whatever. You don't really want to do that because if the company is reorganized, then the process model is no longer valid. So we have found that role is the best way to define the lanes in the process model. Now, a role is defined as a skill level or a responsibility. So it can be, a clerk, administrator, a buyer, an officer, a loan officer, an escrow officer. Those kind of titles are roles. Those are good to use. You could also have one that's authority, which would be, a manager, or I've used some that are just approvers. You're not sure who is actually going to do the approving, but you know that a role has to perform the approval or disapproval. Also, the advantage of roles is that a person can wear several hats or perform several roles. Like if they're doing actual work, they are in one role, but if they are managing or approving, then they are in the manager role, and they can do both. And I'm sure that you have probably spent some time in both areas. Now, the green items are the tasks. I hope you can see that. These prepare offer, accept offer, prepare loan package, those are the tasks. Now the task object, it's important that you can contain the description, the elapsed time, and the resource time. And those are different. Elapsed time means how long did that task take. A resource time is how much time did the person performing that role spend on it. And I'll explain to you why that's important. It can also contain what data comes into that task, is used to perform it, and what data is output as a result of performing the task. In addition, you can put the system description. For example, down here here's an application called the loan processing system, and the task is prepare loan package. Now, when the loan officer executes this task, he uses the system called loan processing system to execute it. So there are two things that occur. One is what does the loan officer do in preparing to use the system, and then what does the system do to support the loan officer's execution of that task. Now, I'll show you in just a minute why that's important, but it's key to capture that information. Now, the pink phi symbol is data objects. Now, these are data that are used in the execution of some of the tasks. They are also inputs or outputs. They typically are documents or data records if they're electronic. The offer to buy in this example is a paper form. It could also be electronically executed. The path shows how it gets from one task to another. And in this case, it goes from the buyer, who fills it out and signs it, to the seller that accepts the offer. So this is a handoff. The task shows the path, and you can also define the means. Now, this can be hand carried, this can be mailed, FedExed, or electronically sent, and any number of other ways to transport that data object. So these are all key elements that are important in defining how the process really operates. Now, when you get to the point where you want to make this better, you want to improve this, these are important to understand how it currently exists so you know how to make it better. Now, the process model has power in that you can get a number of beneficial elements out of it besides just... So the process model can be a proxy for the elapsed time. In other words, by finding out and compiling what each task in the process takes, you can get an estimate for elapsed time from this point to this point in the process. So that's, if this is the current state model, then you know approximately how long this process segment takes to execute. And you can verify this perhaps with some of your measurements that the company takes. So that's a real powerful element. You can estimate how long this process takes. Now, a really interesting side note is that there are, in all of the processes I've done, there is a percentage rate that will tell you how much time is spent executing the task in this process compared to the elapsed time of the process. That percentage runs about 5 or 10%. So there is a lot of time that the process isn't being executed. It was brought out in Michael Hammer's book, The Agenda. That's IBM was in the computer business, of course, in the mainframe business, and in the early days they only leased the computers. Then there was a lawsuit and a judgment that came down from one of the courts that said they had to sell computers. So IBM consented to do that. Then they got into the credit business. They were going to hold the paper for people, their customers, buying the computers. The problem was that people were beating them out of that business because their process took too long. It took about 2 weeks from the time a customer applied for the loan until they could deliver an agreement. Several of the people in the process said it can't really take that long, so they hand carried the paperwork through all of the steps, and they found that the total time that they actually worked on an agreement in the 2-week process was an hour and a half. In other words, that was the amount of resource they spent doing the actual agreement. So it's 1.5 hours versus 80 hours on one shift basis, which they were working. So that's less than 2%. So you can estimate that the amount of time that you actually spend working on one instance of this process versus the elapsed time is somewhere in the area of 5 to 10%. So that leaves a lot of room for improvement if you really want to improve the elapsed time. Okay, the next valuable piece of information that you can get out of this is that if you identify the amount of resource spent on this, you can estimate the cost. In other words, if all of these steps, you knew how long each role spent on each task, and then multiplied it by the rate of the cost rate for each of these roles, then you could total up the amount of money spent on this particular process. So if this was the current state and then you redesigned this into a improved process, you could then say, we think we have improved the cost by X%. The third thing that it can give you is tool requirements. And by tool, I mean application. Here are 2 applications we have identified in this process. This is a loan processing system, and this is an escrow application system. Now, if there were multiple uses of these systems, you could then capture what the system has to do to support each of the tasks and compile them, and that is the tool requirement for a particular system. And I've had several clients who have used this to prepare an RFP to go out to buy a new system. That works very, very well. A fourth thing is that it can provide skill requirements for each of the roles. In other words, if you want to create a skill requirement or a job requirement for the escrow officer, you would then total all of the tasks that they must do in executing this process, and that will be what the job description or the skill requirements for that particular role for executing this process. HR loves this because it's very clear what they must do and what skill level they must have in order to properly execute this process. Okay. That's an overview of the power of process for driving business improvement. This is the first video in the series. There will be at least 7 more, so please return to this channel for additional videos. As always, please leave your comments and questions, and I will respond. Thank you for watching.